reseca muerte no me encuentre, vacía y sola sin haber hecho lo suficiente. Solo le pido a Dios que la guerra no me sea indiferente. Es un monstruo grande, pisa fuerte toda la pobre inocencia de la gente. Es un monstruo grande, pisa fuerte toda la pobre inocencia de la gente. Solo le pido a Dios que el futuro no me sea indiferente. Desahuciado está el que tiene que marchar a vivir una cultura diferente. Solo le pido a Dios que la guerra no me sea indiferente. Es un monstruo grande, pisa fuerte toda la pobre inocencia de la gente. Es un monstruo grande, pisa fuerte toda la pobre inocencia de la gente. The lyrics should be in the chat in English. We have translated this program. Hemos traducido el programa al español para las personas que lo quieran leer en español. So the program is available en español. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Sylvia. So, am I on? My name is Janet Cordes Gibson, and I've been an Ecumenical Peace Institute board member for many years. The roots of our organization go back to the 1967 era, when people all over our country and the world were demonstrating against the Vietnam War. Ecumenical Peace Institute was soon established in Berkeley. And later, EPI joined a national organization for both clergy and laity called Clergy and Laity Concerned. So we're now known as EPI Calc. We invite you to become involved with us and learn about our activities. We have numerous activities against war and against nuclear weapons. You can receive our newsletter. You can donate to our cause. During this program, you will have opportunities to copy information for ways to contact us, ways to join, and ways to donate. We welcome your involvement and thank you for participating today. Now, I would like to introduce you to Betsy Rose. She's a treasured and talented singer and songwriter in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and beyond this area, actually all around the world. And she's been involved in this for many decades. Her music and her songs have enriched the peace movement. here and worldwide. Thank you. Welcome, Betsy.
Hello, all my good friends from EPI. So wish I could be with you in person today, but just so grateful to have a chance to share a song or two with you. Honor the work, honor the hardworking folks who are speaking today, and all the work over the years that you all have done. You're such a vital part of our community, and I am especially grateful for the focus of this event and what I hear as the cost of war and the criminal loss of resource that our country could be using for such important human needs. I know it's infuriating and heartbreaking to all of us. I don't need to say any more. Let's sing. I want you all to sing with me wherever you are, on Zoom or at St. John's or wherever. We know this song really well, but I've made some new verses just for this event. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. No more trillion-dollar wars. No more trillion-dollar wars. We shall not be moved. No more trillion-dollar wars. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. Welcome in the refugees. We shall not be moved. Welcome in the refugees. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. Let's sing this in Spanish now. Oh, I've got to move my lyrics down for that. No, no, no nos moverán. No, no, no nos moverán como un árbol firme junto al río. No nos moverán. Let's defund the Pentagon. We shall not be moved. Sing it with me. Let's defund the Pentagon. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. Green New Deal for everyone. Green New Deal for everyone. We shall not be moved. Green New Deal for everyone. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. Build back better here and now. Build back better here and now. We shall not be moved. Build back better here and now. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. Tax the rich, feed the people. We shall not be moved. Tax the rich, feed the people. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. Let's do the chorus in English together. We shall not be moved. Sing it out. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's standing by the water. We shall not be moved. I got a few more. There's just so much to sing about, and this defunding the military, bringing the money back, it touches every area of our civic life. So these next verses are, a couple of verses are one of the many reasons we need to bring the money home. Make the police accountable, we shall not be moved. Make police accountable, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's standing by the water, we shall not be moved. I'm thinking of Haiti as I sing this. Black lives matter everywhere, we shall not be moved. Black lives matter everywhere, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's standing by the water, we shall not be moved. From Haiti to Afghanistan, from Haiti to Afghanistan, we shall not be moved. From Haiti to Afghanistan, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's standing by the water, we shall not be moved. We shall not. One more time. We shall not be moved. We shall not. We shall not. We shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's standing by the water, we shall not be moved. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Sing on. Have a wonderful day.
Our featured speaker is Rick Sterling. Rick is an investigative journalist based in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's active with the Task Force on the Americas and other organizations, including Syrian Solidarity Movement and Mount Diablo Peace and Justice Center. Rick has researched and written articles challenging the trend towards the corporatization of higher education. He is an active supporter of KPFA listener-sponsored radio and Rossmore Voices for Palestine. Rick was a full-time activist in his early years and took a 25-year detour working as an engineer in electronics and aerospace, primarily at UC Berkeley, and has now returned to work full-time where his heart is: progressive international causes. Rick Sterling.
It's great to be with you today. I'm a longtime friend of Carolyn Scar and Vivian Zelaya, to name two people, so it's great to be with you. I'm going to be talking about U.S. sanctions. I've got a brief presentation that I'm going to share with you. So I'm going to talk about U.S. sanctions, the impact, the consequences, and some recent developments that are quite interesting. Just on October 18, the Department of Treasury released a review. Actually, on the first day, his first day of office, Joe Biden issued National Security Memorandum 1, which included a call for a review of sanctions and whether they were impeding the global fight against COVID-19. Subsequently, Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, asked about whether sanctions were diminishing the power of the U.S. dollar, because more and more countries were seeking to get away from the U.S. Dollar domination. And as well, another high official in the Biden administration asked whether sanctions were impacting civilians in targeted countries. So the review was released on October 18, and the establishment response was that U.S. leaders laid down a solid and sensible sanctions policy. This was from the Atlantic Council, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and other media outlets of, representing the U.S. Establishment were generally positive about the policy. The policy review was actually a very thin document. It was only 6.5 pages, and it really suggested only minor changes. There was no substantial critique, and interestingly enough, although it was supposed to address the question of whether sanctions were impacting the COVID response, there was no mention of that. The response of the political establishment, the Senate Housing Banking Committee, which is got oversight of the Treasury Department, they had a hearing. They had the Deputy Treasury Secretary Wally Adeyemo hearing before them and testifying. And this was in concert with the unveiling of the sanctions review that they had done. Democratic Senator Menendez was quite aggressive, saying that we need more, not less sanctions on Russia, China, Ethiopia. The Republicans were the Republican senators were grilling Adeyemo about how China and Iran are evading sanctions, and the only critical voice really was Senator Ossoff from Georgia, and he noted that the report talks about some successes that they've had, but it said nothing about the failures. So obviously, if you're going to do a review of policy, it's a good thing to look at, well, what are the successes and what things are failures, what things have not worked. And he was grilling Adeyemo about why there's no mention of the failures of sanctions. I think the reality is that the establishment is very aware that U.S. sanctions are not very effective in many cases, and so there's one trend, and the Council on Foreign Relations and Foreign Affairs magazine has been quite explicit about saying that there needs to be much less of a go-it-alone attitude and a much more effort to bring Europe and bring other countries into alignment, so that it's not just the U.S. lashing out and sanctioning individuals and countries left and right. A progressive critique of sanctions, as opposed to the one in the Senate and the mainstream media, I was part of a small team that did a 35-page report, which we published in September, and it's titled "We Don't Deserve This: The Cost and Consequences of U.S. Sanctions." We began this actually in the early spring when we heard news that the Biden administration was going to do a review. So we thought, well, let's do our own review and compare and contrast. So we began in February or March, and then we just completed it, as I said, 5 or 6 weeks ago. Of course, it's got a very different we identified many problems with sanctions, and our conclusions are, of course, very different. This is the cover page of the report. We don't deserve this. That is what a woman in Damascus, Syria, said to me when I asked her, "Well, what do you think about sanctions?" I was in Syria in May for their presidential election, and had a lot of chance, visited lots of places, talked with lots of different people, and wherever I went, I asked people, "What do you think of U.S. sanctions?" Which the most extreme sanctions are called the Caesar sanctions, and they were imposed actually in June of 2020 just when the pandemic was sweeping the world. So here it was the United States dramatically escalating their sanctions on Syria. This here is a photograph. The cover photograph is from Venezuela. They didn't have running water. Why didn't they have running water? Because they didn't have electricity. Why didn't they have electricity? Because the system had been attacked, and because even though it's an oil-producing country, you have to refine the oil to create diesel to run the water pumps and other the other infrastructure, and that has been under extreme sanctions, which the Trump and Pompeo were talking very much about extreme sanctions. Of course, their main electrical plant for the whole country was sabotaged, and there's some evidence that the U.S. was involved with, had some knowledge or some planning, had something to do with that. The evidence of that being that Marco Rubio knew that had insights about the attack before the energy minister of the country did. So how did he know that before the energy minister of the country did? So in any case, this is a photograph of people lined up to get water. They did not have running water. In fact, a friend of mine was in Caracas, and she said that whenever the water comes on, people rush home and turn on the water and fill up their bathtubs so that they can so that they have a water that way, and they don't have to go and wait in line with a bucket or a barrel. So it's that is extreme. That's not a typical case in Venezuela. They usually do have running water, but this is an extreme example. Sanctions primarily hurt civilians. This is report after report after report indicate that it's not the wealthy that are hurt by sanctions. When the state infrastructure, when the state resources, when they break down, when they are under attack, when the currency of a country is under attack, and the currency is devalued by 10%, 25%, 50%, 80%, 90%. When that happens, it's the poor that are most impacted, and many middle-class people are driven into poverty. So when I was in Syria, I was told that even middle-class people can only have meat once a month. So the common scenes here, the previous photograph is from Syria. This photograph is from Venezuela. In both cases, they're having to push their car because of gasoline shortages and the huge long lineups, and there's the shortages of essential goods. In Syria, Syria was a country before the war which was tremendously. It had no foreign debt. It was self-sufficient in food. It was self-sufficient in energy. And they had pharmaceutical industry. They did not need to import many of their goods. Then the attacks began in 2011. Basically a gang of countries financed a terrorist war on Nicaragua, somewhat similar to the financing and the organization of the Contras in Nicaragua in the 1980s. But this is what's going on in Venezuela or in Syria today. So when I was there, I saw this man, going through the garbage, looking for some food scraps. One of our findings, we had a variety of findings. One of our findings was that definitely sanctions have hindered the global response to the COVID pandemic. There's a lot of examples of this. Just a few of them are that Cuba, of course, was able to invent and create a vaccine, but they didn't have the syringes, and they had huge difficulty because it turns out there are very few manufacturing plants in the world which are qualified to and which are able to mass produce syringes for use with vaccines. And they had a very hard time getting them. Blocking another example is Venezuela had actually paid their money for the COVAX vaccine arrangement. There was an international arrangement where there would be a supply to countries. It was a kind of an international effort so that underdeveloped countries could receive large shipments of vaccines, but they had to pay the funds. Venezuela paid the funds, but it was blocked by the U.S. They blocked the money transfer. Another example is that in Syria, under the Caesar sanctions, all reconstruction by the government is prohibited. And the U.S. not only does that for U.S. companies, they do it through what they call secondary sanctions, in that if any other country invests money in or supports financially or in engineering technology or in building supplies, equipment supplies, technology transfer, they are under U.S. sanctions. So that a country in the Gulf, for example, United Arab Emirates or some other country, if they wanted to help Syria rebuild hospitals that were damaged in the conflict, they cannot do that. And the penalties are really extreme. So obviously that has severely impacted the ability to respond to COVID in Syria. Pharmaceutical plants as well. As I was saying, Syria used to be largely self-sufficient in pharmaceuticals, except for the most kind of exotic or specialized medicines. But they produced a lot of their own medicines. In the conflict, in the war, the insurgents specifically targeted hospitals, and they specifically targeted manufacturing plants. And now those have to be rebuilt. The country is very largely under the control of the government again. But they can't rebuild because the U.S. So-called Caesar sanctions. Another finding was that sanctions have led to the extraterritorial imprisonment of people. This is another feature which is pretty astounding when you think of it. The U.S. maintaining the right to imprison citizens of other countries for dealing with third-party countries, for example, Meng Wanzhou, the leader of Huawei. I think she was the vice president of Huawei, or maybe she was the chief financial officer of Huawei. She was put under house arrest in Vancouver, Canada, when she was on travel. And held for over 2 years with the U.S. trying to extradite her from Canada. And just a few weeks ago, they finally released her, and she went back to China. But she was under house arrest in Vancouver for 2 full years, with the U.S. Trying to get their clutches on her. There's another important case of a Venezuelan a businessman who was an envoy and as well as a diplomat. He was a Venezuelan envoy who was helping Venezuela arrange for the acquisition of food and medicines and other things that are necessary for Venezuela. And he was traveling on his way to Iran. Iran has been a big supporter of Venezuela. He was on his way to Iran. His plane had to stop for refueling, and they were blocked from stopping in another country, I think in Morocco. They ended up having to land in Cape Verde Island, and which is a very small island nation off the coast of Africa in the Atlantic. And so Alex Saab was in solitary confinement, and he was under arrest in Cape Verde for over a year, while the U.S. again tried to extradite him. All of the legal bodies, there's an organization of West African states, which is comparable to the European Union in that it's an organization that combines several African states, and they have common policies and common rules. Anyway, the court of that association ruled that Cape Verde should release Alex Saab, and he should be paid compensation for his severe punishment. And it was a very blatant example where the U.S. was bribing Cape Verde and offering to invest tens of millions of dollars if they complied with the expectation that they would comply. They stalled, and then the day before an election happened in Cape Verde just a couple of weeks ago, the day before the election, which elected to power a citizen who would have refused the U.S. request, Alex Saab was kidnapped. He was effectively kidnapped from Cape Verde, and he's in a Florida prison right now. So, and all of this, the point is that this is where sanctions lead. They are extraterritorial claims to extraterritorial rights, so that the U.S. Is filing charges, imprisoning, kidnapping, putting in rendition people. And in this case here, it's especially interesting because there's something called the Vienna Code of Diplomacy, which is a binding treaty, the Vienna Treaty on Diplomacy, that goes back to the 1960s. The U.S. is one of the original signers, and this is a complete violation of that, in that Alex Saab was an ambassador to the African Union. And they have arrested and kidnapped and have him in prison in the U.S. So it's, you have some really extreme cases like this. Another finding, one of our findings, is that many U.S. industries, farm and trade associations are against U.S. sanctions policy. Now, this is from Iowa, this is a big billboard, unilateral sanctions hurting Iowa, hurting U.S. And the organization is called USA Engage. But this is just one example. There's this particular organization, USA Engage, is very articulate and speaks about the need to use diplomacy instead of economic warfare, and making the very strong point that they're hurting. Not only are they hurting the people in targeted countries such as Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua or whatever, they're hurting farmers and workers in the U.S. who would like to trade and receive goods and export goods to those countries. So this is another aspect of the policy. Now, some people wonder, well, where do these sanctions come from? Some of the sanctions are enacted into law. The Congress and the Senate passes laws imposing sanctions, but a large number of the sanctions are done by fiat, by the president. And they do it, following a measure which says that it gives the president the authority if there is an emergency or a threat to national security. So, for example, President Obama imposed the sanctions on Venezuela initially by claiming that Venezuela was an emergency and a national security threat to the United States. Well, how ridiculous can you get? Now, the U.S. is truly a threat to Venezuela. But the idea that Venezuela is a threat to the United States is not credible. Venezuela has never taken any military actions. It's never hurt the U.S. economy. Hugo Chavez, had independent ideas and independent policies, but that's not a threat to the national security of the U.S. So, but here we see President Trump signing one of his many measures. President Trump, he was on tap. They just to show you how extreme this is, they imposed 1,000 additional sanctions. And under Biden, unfortunately, that has not been reduced very much. The U.S. is continuing to impose sanctions. Now, one of the most interesting findings in our research was that most of the world, a huge percentage of the world, 70% of the world, condemns the U.S. for this policy. It would be interesting to know how many Americans or what percentage of Americans are aware of that. I think it would be extremely low, because it's extremely low because the media never talks about it. For example, at the United Nations, they refer to U.S. sanctions as unilateral coercive measures. They're unilateral because they're not done as part of the United Nations or the UN Security Council. They're unilateral, just imposed by the U.S. or dictated by the U.S. They're coercive measures because they are very much a form of economic coercion, which in many cases is, in the case that I was talking about, of imprisoning individuals, imprisoning diplomats and business people, putting people in prison. How coercive is that? But what's interesting is that the statement, and these statements have been going on for years. This is not just a one-time deal. They've been going on for 10 or 15 years. Very strong statements have been issued by the United Nations General Assembly, and they say explicitly these violate international law, violate international humanitarian law, and they violate the UN Charter. So it's and then about 15 years ago, because of this situation, the United Nations Human Rights Commission mandated the creation of a position, a special rapporteur, that would look into the impact of sanctions. In other words, they tried to determine, well, what are the facts, what's the evidence, let's have some objective reports. And since that time, there have been 3 special rapporteurs, and they have produced some excellent reports on the impact on the ground. Just last week, maybe it's not even last week. It's actually it's not just last week. It's 2 days ago. The current special rapporteur on the economic impact of sanctions and the impact of unilateral coercive measures, she issued a report on the impact of sanctions in Zimbabwe. And I haven't had a chance to read that yet, but I'm looking forward to, because her previous reports on Venezuela and Syria were excellent. And yet, if you go to the New York Times and you look in the archives, you can't find a single reference to unilateral coercive measures or Alina Duhan, who is the current special rapporteur. So this is to underscore my point that the media has completely censored discussion of this issue. So that's the Western media is not reported on these realities, and they ignore the UN condemnations and the reports of UN experts. That's just what I've been talking about. How am I doing on time, by the way? I didn't take note of when I started. Okay. Anyway, just a little bit more. You know, on the same point about the United Nations and the world being quite united against this policy, and yet are being completely unaware, ignorant, uninformed, really. The American people are uninformed. So this was the vote in the UN General Assembly this year, just a few months ago, on calling for the U.S. to end the Cuba embargo, and the vote was 184 to 2, and the two being the United States and Israel, with 3 abstentions. So, I mean, the irony of this, because we always hear the Biden and we always hear the United States claiming to be the global leader, leading the international community. Why don't other countries follow the rules-based order and so forth? It's the hypocrisy is stunning, and it's nowhere near as stunning, or nowhere near more stunning, at least, than around the issue of sanctions, because the sanctions are being condemned widely, and yet most Americans have no idea of this. Okay, sadly, the situation continues. Since the report, that is the Treasury report, the review of sanctions, it came out on October 18. Since that happened, nothing seems to have changed. The administration has announced increased sanctions on Iran. They've imposed sanctions on Ethiopia. They've threatened sanctions on Nicaragua, prejudging the election that's going to be taking place there next on a week from Sunday, a week from tomorrow. And the Senate has a new bill calling for more sanctions on China. So it looks like as much as the review called for a sharper focus a sharper focus on having a specific goal in mind when imposing a sanction. They talked about having a framework. They talked about calibrating. They had all this nice talk. They talked about modernizing. And of course, they talked about the need for more money and staff. But it looks like it's just more of the same. There does not appear to be any significant change forthcoming. So what to do? Pressure Congress, not Congress. Support the Sanctions Kill Coalition. Keep doing what you're doing. I think this is a general discussion. I guess the first thing is learning what sanctions are and how they hurt people, and then working with others. We need to. One of the things that strikes me as most important is education, and I suspect that a lot of people in Congress, a lot of congressmen and congresswomen are not very well aware of what the impact of sanctions are, and I suspect that a lot of them don't even know about the widespread condemnation, because they read the Washington Post and they read The Hill and PBS and the New York Times, and if it has never been reported there, they probably don't know about it. So as much as I think part of our task is to spread the knowledge, I think we'll put maybe I'll put in the chat the download link, or we can communicate somehow the link for people who are interested to download the report that was produced, so that you can read that if you're interested. The Sanctions Kill has a website. It's called just search on Sanctions Kill, and you'll find the website very easily. And then so I guess I'm going to leave it for now. I'll be happy to take any questions if people are curious. I think we're posting questions in the chat. And I look forward to talking to you more and hearing more. So that's it. Bye bye.
Thank you, Rick, for your devastating and insightful information. Please put your questions for Rick in the chat. We are exceedingly proud of our own gifted poet, Carolyn Scarr, longtime program director and all-time inspiration and backbone of Ecumenical Peace Institute. Carolyn will now share her poem, Recipe.
Later. Recipe. Into a quart jar, place 2 cups of water taken from a ditch beside the pasture where the cattle once grazed. If you don't live near a pasture, water from any drainage ditch or from an urban creek may be substituted. Add 1 cup water from the toilet bowl where you rinse the baby's diaper when she was sick. Be sure you do not flush the toilet first. Ask your husband to urinate into the jar. Only a little is needed. When your neighbor washes his car, scoop up some of the runoff. Add half a cup to the jar. Put in a tablespoon or more of fine dirt. Screw down the lid. Shake well. Although the cholera and typhoid bacilli will probably be lacking, and the amoebae, following this recipe carefully will result in a reasonable facsimile of the solution drunk every day by millions of people in Iraq, whose sewage treatment plants and water purification systems were bombed to smithereens in 1991 and cannot be rebuilt under the conditions of siege referred to as sanctions, maintained principally by military blockade, principally by the United States of America. Take your jar to your congressperson or senator. Ask that person to keep it on the table where he or she sits in the halls of Congress until the water runs clean from every tap in Iraq and no baby dies of dysentery. This recipe can be increased to serve 22 million people.
Thank you, Carolyn, for the devastating reality check. And how many other countries?
Take it away.
How many other countries might this apply to? I'm thinking of Gaza. Thank you, Carolyn. We really need to realize the water situation. It's my privilege now to introduce Pierre Labassiere of Haiti Action Committee, one of our own EPI board members. Pierre is co-founder of Haiti Action Committee and Haiti Emergency Relief Fund, established in the Bay Area in 1991 and 2004, respectively, working with Haiti's grassroots movement that is engaged in the struggle for justice and democracy. Haiti Action Committee and Haiti Emergency Relief provide information regarding conditions on the ground, assist refugees, and support community-based initiatives and institutions working for the liberation and rebuilding of Haiti. Pierre Labossiere will inform us on Haiti's struggle for democratic self-governance. Pierre.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Ecumenical Peace Institute, for having me. And Rick, thank you for this very powerful presentation about sanctions and what they do. And the people of Haiti right now have a taste of sanctions, even though it's not being presented as such, because what's going on right now in Haiti, there has been an artificially created gasoline shortage and diesel shortage that has caused many hospitals, many institutions to pretty much grind to a halt, and has ground to a halt various activities throughout the country, including schools, students being able to go to school. And there have been, and people's humor deals with it in the sense of making jokes about it. Groups of young people have been on bicycles to say enough with this, what's going on. So it's not an officially declared sanction by a particular country, but basically what many people have been discussing is the fact that the Haitian people have been opposed to another rise in the price of gasoline, which has been affected the majority population terribly. And so people have been opposed to this. So one of the ways that they are putting pressure on the population has been to limit the gasoline and diesel and kerosene, any petroleum products, to such an extent as to make people really stop opposing what they will be when the gas will become available, and people will be more than happy to pay whatever the high price is, as now people are paying incredible amounts for a gallon of gasoline. So this is one thing. And when Haiti as a nation was founded in 1804, 1806, the US as a young country, being very much dependent and having slavery as an institution, having its society based on slavery, basically imposed an embargo on Haiti so that in an effort to crush the new nation founded by formerly enslaved Africans who had broken their chains and declared themselves an independent nation. And so the US refused to recognize the independence of Haiti and joined with France and the other slave-owning powers at the time, Britain, Spain, in order to destroy this example of human beings fighting for their rights and for the rights, for their rights to dignity. And it was a threat to human bondage everywhere. And Haiti had the gall to say and to proclaim to the world that it's an independent nation, and it declared itself a sanctuary nation, appealing to enslaved human beings, enslaved Africans and people of indigenous origin to come to Haiti, and Haiti will welcome them, and they can gain Haitian citizenship and live as free human beings in Haiti. And so in the same way, Haiti invited people who are fighting for freedom everywhere to come. So all of this affirmation of human rights and dignity and self-determination brought about incredible sanctions on Haiti, and particularly from the US when, and it wasn't until 1862, during the Civil War, that because of the rise of the forces, of the progressive forces, Black forces in the US, and the abolitionists and the current sentiment that was in effect at the time against the institution of slavery to defeat the Confederacy. And that's when President Lincoln actually recognized the independence of the Haitian state. So bringing it more to the present in line with these sanctions. What's going on in Haiti right now? I mentioned what the current situation and which is another aspect of what's been plaguing, of what's been imposed on the Haitian people, resulting in miserable conditions. And this, we can say, these miserable conditions, we can say that they date back to the US invasion of Haiti in 1915. So from 1915 to 1934, the United States had boots on the ground in Haiti. So from this time on, we can say that Haiti became really under US domination. And this domination is continuing to the present with very harsh, dire consequences, increasingly harsher consequences for the majority population in the US. And this is what is bringing us to this massive exodus of people, of refugees from Haiti. Many of them went to various countries. Number one, the Dominican Republic, which is next door, then to the various countries of Central America, the Caribbean, and later on Brazil and Chile. And now what we have seen at the US-Mexico border are this massive wave of refugees having fled Haiti to other countries in the Americas, now have made their way to the border of US-Mexico border, where they are brutally, as we have seen, brutally treated in a very racist way by the US government, by the Biden administration, continuing the policy of Trump, continuing the policy of Obama. And these are things that we need to rise up against. So how did we get here? I mentioned 1915, the international, when the US landed boots on the ground against what at the time was taking place, which was a people's uprising to defend their rights to the land, to defend their rights to work the land, to demand land distribution. And this was a particularly successful series of uprisings that were taking place. So the US invaded just to make sure that the status quo could be maintained. So fast forwarding, when the US left in 1934, then they through the Haitian military, as is the case in many countries of the Americas, they continued to impose domination on Haiti by maintaining the rule of a minority against the majority population. Really, in a sense, having excluding the majority population from participation in the democratic life of the country, from participation in the decision-making, from participation in having access to services and to the rights that they themselves are entitled to as human beings, number one, and as citizens of Haiti. So this is what went on. And usually people stop there in 1934 and don't follow the century of US domination of Haiti to the present. So Papa Doc Duvalier is the other reference that people are familiar with when it comes to Haiti. Papa Doc and Baby Doc Duvalier, that terrible dictatorship, which is part of a series of an imposition of rulers on the Haitian people, who the Haitian people did not vote for. And these rulers were puppet rulers, continuing and making sure that what the US wanted out of Haiti, which is exploitation of our resources, which is to prevent Haitians from being sovereign in their decision-making, that in other words, this is what was continued throughout that period up until today. By 1986, after people revolted against the Duvalier dictatorship, it was under Baby Doc. What we've had has been a series of military dictators, again, with full support of the US. And finally, by 1990, the people of Haiti, through their incredible resistance, in alliance with various forces throughout the world, progressive forces, people in Haiti were successful in having the first free democratic election in the country's history. And that's when they elected Jean-Bertrand Aristide, Father Aristide, the parish priest, who wrote the book In the Parish of the Poor, and it was as a leader of the movement People drafted him to run for office and he was elected president. Now, why do I bring this up? Because number one, this was a people's movement, organized election that resulted in what the people wanted. And what was the Aristide government mandate? The mandate was to change the structures of the country, to make the country more democratic, to make the country democratic. What does that mean? It didn't mean by that to just vote every 5 years for president. It's meant simply to take the resources, participatory democracy, where people have access to the decision making, where people can decide how we're going to use the tax monies that our labor is producing and having them being brought to us in terms of services such as hospitalization, education, access to clean drinking water, to potable water, having providing education for our children, providing support for our farmers, making sure that the factory workers are getting paid wages, livable wages, and making sure that the country invests in affordable housing. So this is what the Famille Lavalas government of President Aristide, both before the 1991 coup d'etat and later on after, when it came back to the presidency in 2000, in the elections of 2000, was able to do and implemented a series of measures with phenomenal results. For example, the investment that they did in the school system was tremendous in terms of building the Famille Lavalas government of President Aristide built more schools, more high schools, primary schools throughout the country, particularly in the rural areas that before never had any schooling, really, any schools that were built for the majority population that was based in the rural areas. And most importantly, and I know EPI really would like this, this was a government that was elected by the people of Haiti with the philosophy of the liberation theology, where they were beating the swords into plowshares. What I mean by that is the Haitian military, before created by the US during the occupation, had been taking 40% of the national budget to do what? To get weapons from the US, because Haiti makes no weapons. Those weapons were used against the Haitian population. Those weapons were used against the labor unions to break up the labor unions whenever the unions were organizing for wages, because runaway factories leaving the US could come to Haiti and pay people 20 cents per day, back then. And now they're only paying $5 a day for a 10-hour workday. So, and when people were rising up, you had the police and the military beating them up. So President Aristide was empowered by the Haitian people to get rid of this military that kept on doing coup d'etats after coup d'etats and massacres of the people, so that it could maintain the status quo that would benefit a small little clique of business elite that was allied with powerful forces in the US and also in France and Canada and what have you. So the struggle actually went on, and people fought back in that way. And President Aristide, by disbanding the military, the money saved was invested based on their program Investir dans l'humain, which is the book here that I'm showing, investing in people. And this was the platform of Famille Lavalas, which directed that those resources could be better used to serve the majority population. Symbolic to that, Famille Lavalas decommissioned the equivalent of the Pentagon in Haiti. It was called Grand Quartier Général des Forces Armées, the general headquarters of the armed forces. So it was decommissioned and the building turned over to the newly created Ministry for Women's Affairs, because the women of Haiti were neglected, their health was neglected, their rights as citizens was made, they were treated worse than second-class citizens. So by having a ministry for women affairs that could deal with all these issues affecting women, and when we are talking women, we are talking the basic structure of the family that could address that. And so this was something that was being addressed. This is what the Bush administration, I'm talking Bush the son, could not stand. It could not stand this program that was implemented, that was being implemented by Haitians to help Haitians. Haitians committed to help Haitians, not people committed to line their pockets while they are giving away the resources of Haiti, resources such as gold, silver, marble, copper, bauxite for free to US-based corporations, Canadian corporations. And President Harrison said, no, we have the gold, we have these items. If you want them, then we will negotiate a contract that will benefit the Haitian people, because those resources are the property of the Haitian people. So 2004, we had a coup d'etat, very brutal second coup d'etat against the Famille Lavalas government. And one took place in 1991, but because of the tremendous organization of the people, the resistance and international resistance, we turned that around. And so by 2004, there was the second coup d'etat, which was a very bloody affair. Over 10,000 people lost their lives. And as a result, what we are living through today, and I'm sorry, there is a little lighting here. Trying to decrease the light. And what we are living through today in Haiti is a direct consequence of that second coup d'etat of 2004, which and the continuing US, United Nations, United States occupation of Haiti. So today, Haiti, the people of Haiti have continued to resist this coup d'etat. The corporate media and many other, including the progressive media, did not make that connections. So I would love for people who are watching to make the connections between the coup d'etat of 2004 and the continued resistance of the Haitian people in refusing to accept this coup d'etat. And this is what this whole situation today is all about. What was created? What is creating this reign of terror that the Haitian people are living through today? This wave of kidnapping sweeping all over Haiti, the brutal repression of the Haitian police going way back since the coup d'etat, the new founding, the resurrection of the death squads, of the Duvalier type death squads, the Tonton Makouts, if they have another name now. In the media, they call them gangs. It's a way to camouflage, it's a way to hide the reality. What is it? These are the Tonton Makouts. But basically, when you call them gangs, that means the US occupation, the US-UN occupation, present day, has nothing to do with it. They are outside the law. These are outlaw elements. But by their own words and by various accounts of people, observers of Haiti, the occupation governments of Haiti since 2004 have been providing these groups with weapons, working them. They've been working in tandem with the police to terrorize the population. Every time the people are rising up, every time people have demonstrations, they work side by side with the Haitian police to massacre the population. There have been several massacres that have taken place in working class neighborhoods of Haiti, simply to prevent, to force people to accept a brutal situation that is unacceptable to human beings. And people are saying, no, we are human beings. We have the right to clean water. Our children have a right to education. We have a right to health care. Our peasant farmers have a right to that their tax money be returned to them in terms of credit so that they can invest in their farms. We have the right to have clean water. And these are basic human rights that our brothers and sisters are demanding in Haiti, and they are being massacred as a result. Now, Haiti is awash with weapons, sophisticated weapons. assault weapons. Those who they are presenting as gangs, who are actually death squads, government affiliated death squads, who the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated that these people were actually doing a good job. I'm paraphrasing what he said, because he said in the areas, in the neighborhoods they control, homicide rate has gone down. Where did he get that? I don't know. So this is a pure admission that Haitian lives to these people, to Antonio Guterres. Now remember, he's the Secretary General of the UN. Haitian lives do not matter to him because these are the very people who have been committing massacres all over Haiti, taking people's lands, burning down their homes, the very homes that their tax money through the Lavalas government of President Aristide had established, had built for them, affordable housing, good housing. They've been setting fire to them, pushing the people out, expropriating them, sending them away. And this is what is connected. These are the push factors. This is what people are fleeing from in Haiti today. So today we have a situation in Haiti where kidnapping is at an all-time high. I know it has reached the media because you've had a number of American missionaries kidnapped, but these are the realities that Haitian clergy, Haitian everyday Haitian people, including students. As I'm talking to you today, there was an attempted kidnapping, and which was foiled right in front of a school in Port-au-Prince. And as it was being foiled, they sprayed the many students were wounded by the gunfire that the death squads sprayed them with. And this is the situation. No one is spared. So all of this is happening while Haiti is under United Nations occupation. People need to understand that. In the press, they make it appear as if, well, it's Haitians. No, it is not. Haiti is being ruled by a core group entities, an international core group, which is made up of the representative of the United Nations, the representative of the Organization of American States, the US ambassador, the representative of you have Spain, Canada, France, Germany, the US. So there are 9 of them all together, and they call themselves the core group of friends of Haiti. With friends like that, they are clearly enemies of the Haitian people. And so Haitians call them the core gang, meaning that they are in charge of all that gang that they call those death squads that are operating in Haiti. So this is what we are dealing with at the moment in the country. But what are the Haitian people doing about it? People in Haiti have been organizing. From Lavalas 3 years ago came out with a proposal to get away as a solution to the crisis. And it's called Salut, people called it Salut Public for short, but it's a proposal to create a government of public safety to deal with the issues affecting the population of Haiti. And this is what's going on. And right now we have a total of there are hundreds of organizations throughout the country that have signed on to this. They have signed on to this proposal. They have expanded it. Each one put in their own additional items. And so it is looking at the refoundation of the Haitian state. What does it call for? To rebuild our democratic institutions, to deal with the immediate needs of the people in terms of healthcare, in terms of having schools that are operating for teachers to get paid, having proper sanitation in the country, and establishing a climate and deal with that corruption that is killing the Haitian people. And so with that, we are hoping the US is opposed to it because the US wants elections immediately to occur in Haiti or in the next 2, 3, 4 months, whatever they are proposing. But the Haitian people are saying, no, we don't want that. First, we need to bring peace and stability, have a Haitian solution, a grassroots organized solution to the problem. And then we can build the structures that will make the country safe enough to have proper elections, not show elections where the results are already predetermined in Washington down to the local representatives, but elections where the Haitian people can actually come out freely and democratically elect representatives of their choosing who will be looking out and representing their interests. So I want to stop right here. I want to urge your support, your solidarity. We need to let people know what's going on in Haiti, and the more faith-based organizations and other organizations that can decode the myth from the lies, the better it will be for our people and help us out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pierre, for educating us on Haiti's heroic struggle. Please put your questions for Pierre in the chat. Now, let's welcome Carolyn back for a poem on Haiti.
Invoking the flood in Port-au-Prince. Sudden rain descends outside our dining room. Drops the size of thimbles strike the courtyard awning in rackety thunder. People run to bring cushions in from chairs, take down clothes from the line, shut windows. Runoff from the brief downpour converges on the city below, built on the dump. A child care center is knee-deep in brown water. Mud and garbage flow in a filthy slurry from the surrounding suburbs down to Cité Soleil, the city of the sun. A wall surrounds the city of toil, where people slaved for $1 a day in cavernous buildings now echoing empty. In the brief rain, unsound foundations crumble. The wall goes down, crushes lean-to shacks. 5 people die. Laws of gravity reverse. Water flow uphill. Cleanse of filth the city of darkness. Purify each crack and corner of the city of greed. Wash clean our lives. Prepare us to build a city of light.
Thank you, Carolyn. As we will join you in the wish to build the City of Light. As most of you know, Ecumenical Peace Institute struggles to bring to us all the light of courageous love through protest, poetry, information, music, and the annual Good Friday Interfaith Liturgy protest at the gates of the Lawrence Livermore Nuclear Weapons Laboratory. We gratefully accept donations for our work at our website, epicalc.org. Just press the donation button or mail a check to our post office in Berkeley. That's Post Office Box 9334, Berkeley, California, 94709. Don't forget to put your questions for our speakers in the chat. Now we'll have quickly another song from Betsy Rose.
Hello again, my friends. I am very grateful that we've had a focus on Haiti today. What is happening at our borders and what has happened in that land because of our interference on so many levels, plus the earthquakes, is just a lot to behold, and I'm very grateful that we're holding it together. I happen to have a song about Haiti that I wrote after the large earthquake of 2010, I think it was. And I asked a friend who had a project in Haiti, as I thought about writing a song to honor the recovery and the work and the disaster and the human impact. Anyway, I said, is there a phrase in Haiti that people say that sort of captures something about the their culture, the attitude, something that is popular that people say a lot that I could maybe make into a song. And she thought a minute and she said, yeah, there is one. And I want to apologize to our Haitian speaker for probably mispronouncing and perhaps even giving wrong information here. I'm just doing my best as I know how to do. But she said there's a phrase called, that it goes petit petit n'arrivé. And it means little by little we get there. And that to me is such a message of persistence, of faithful persistence in the face of what seemed to be impossible odds. And that there's a patience there and a persistence and a faith that I think we could all learn from. So the words are very simple. I hope you sing along on the chorus. Piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti n'arrivé. That's it. That's really all of it. And there's a chorus that uses those words. And then at the end of every verse, there's a little repeated part of that little phrase. So I hope you enjoy it. This is a recording I made just a week or so ago at another event that I was singing at. So piti piti n'arrivé, and may we all live with that patience and that faith and that persistence so that we, little by little, together make our way. Thank you, everyone. Just have the chorus. So fun to sing. Piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti, piti 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 n'arrivé. Let's try. Piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti, piti 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 n'arrivé. Little by little we make our way, little by little and day by day. A little work, a little love, piti piti n'arrivé. Let's sing it. Piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti, piti 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 n'arrivé. Good song to dance to, good song to clap to, play some drum to. A little effort and a little grace, a little patience and a lot of faith. Hand in hand we rebuild our land. Piti piti n'arrivé. Here we go. Piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti, piti 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 n'arrivé. An ocean of joy in a world of tears, a mountain of courage when we quake with fear. A mighty force, it is our source. Piti piti n'arrivé, yeah. Piti piti n'arrivé, n'arrivé, piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti, piti 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 n'arrivé. Try some echoes, play with it. Piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti. Piti 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 n'arrivé, piti piti n'arrivé, piti piti n'arrivé, n'arrivé, piti piti, piti 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 n'arrivé. Yeah. Woo! Yeah.
Questions for our speakers. Thank you so much, Betsy. And the questions for our speakers now. Rick, the first question is for you. Do sanctions help the people of the United States?
No. Should I say more?
Yeah, just a little bit more.
I think in this audience, I think it'd probably be 100% agreement. I'm pretty certain. Yeah, they don't help. You know, in my presentation, I talked about the farm groups, the manufacturing groups, the trade groups that are speaking out quite eloquently, but the question is why they persist. And The only reason I can come up with is because of the power of the military complex. They just have so much sway, and so that leads to the exclusion of any information which is contrary. Talking about how many tens of thousands of people have died because of sanctions in those countries. So I think they're definitely against our interest. They make the United States very unpopular around the world. I mean, that 70% figure is an overwhelming majority of the world condemns it. And interestingly enough, we've all traveled internationally, so we know that people in underdeveloped countries are smart. It may be a campesino that only has a couple of years of grade school, but they have no more about international politics than a lot of college graduates in the United States. But if, for whatever the reason, there is a lack of awareness. But I think it's very, very clear that the sanctions are against our interest, and that's it underscores why they really need to end. It's terrible. And one element that we go into in the report is if what about in the future there could be claims made on the US for the cost to other countries of what the US has done. I mean, if other countries have had to think about Iraq for their 6-month occupation of Kuwait, they were under sanctions for more than a decade. They had to pay billions of dollars in compensation. Well, the United States just whether it's against Cuba or it's against Venezuela or Syria there's so many countries, Iran, around the world, which the U.S. has imposed measures which have hurt those countries economically and hurt their population physically. Why shouldn't the U.S. be, why shouldn't they be held accountable? So if there's ever comes a day where the International Court of Justice, which did rule in favor of Nicaragua because of the U.S. support for the Contras, if there ever comes a time where there's an international legal body, the U.S. is responsible for think about the consequences of the U.S. sponsored coup where they kidnapped President Aristide, and what has followed, what has transpired because of that. So I think just in terms of liability, that's something that we should think about too. Now, our report included, there were 3 people there was a team of 3. One of the 3 was John Philpott, who's a Montreal attorney, who specializes in international law. And he was really adamant that the U.S. it should be liable for the consequences of sanctions. So even if we were to look at it from that point of the future, we should end the sanctions. We should stop that policy.
Thanks, Rick. Pierre, quickly, what would you like faith-based organizations to do to support the people of Haiti? You're muted, Pierre.
Rick was correct when he addressed that. It's education, meaning information, exchange of information. There is a lot that's going on in Haiti that people aren't aware of. So once people know, people can take actions. Right now, immediately, one of the things that would be very helpful is former Ambassador Daniel Foote, who resigned maybe about a month ago because of his opposition to US foreign policy. And he was appalled, outraged by the treatment of Haitian refugees. He talked about the initiative by Haitian grassroots organizations, by Haitian-based organizations, which is called the August 30th Accord or the Montana Accord. This is what I talked about, the Salut Public proposal that Famille Lavalas had put forward, which has now been has engaged many other organizations throughout the society to participate into a refounding of the Haitian state. Meaning what? To put a stop to the way that Haiti is going downhill very fast, has gone downhill very fast under this close to 18-year occupation following the coup d'etat against President Aristide. So that's one of the things people should support. One, to oppose present US foreign policy, to call President Biden and say enough of this. Number one, we need to support the grassroots initiative, the civil society organizations initiative, and it's called the Montana Accord because it was signed at the Hotel Montana and on the date of August 30th, people call it both ways. And that is very important. Secondly, all deportations, Haitian refugees, their rights must be respected as refugees under international law and US law. They must be given a due process so they can present their cases for asylum, present their cases so that they can benefit from refugee status. This has to happen. Thirdly, the US and the UN need to stop supporting the death squads in Haiti. I'm accusing them to have been saying that, exposing this, that they've been supporting many of the organizations that they call gangs, but that the Haitian people call death squads, and also arming the Haitian police, which has been brutally repressive against the Haitian people. So that must stop. So an end to present US foreign policy regarding Haiti. The Biden administration needs to support the solution presented by the Haitian societal organizations to rebuild Haiti, and they need to stop supporting the current corrupt and dictatorial regime of Ariel Henry that is in place right now, which is a continuation of the Jovenel Moïse dictatorship.
Thank you, Pierre. This question is for both of you, or either of you. Can you either of you recommend media that's reliable and would give us the facts rather than spin on the issues that you've spoken on? Whoever would like to go first, go ahead.
Do you want to go first, Pierre?
Go ahead, Rick.
Okay. I think Covert Action magazine is very good. The Gray Zone is very good. Consortium News, Mint Press News, Dissident Voice. These are a few of the publications. There's a new one in the Middle East that's doing great work. It's called The Cradle. I think it's thecradle.co. Sharmeen Arwani is the editor of that. I could give more, but those are a few that I think are very good. They really push back against in the foreign policy area of the regime change approach, which some of the left, frankly, is not that good on. They are influenced by the propaganda, the extreme propaganda. But Gray Zone has been doing great work. The other ones I mentioned, Mint Press News, Dissident Voice, Covert Action magazine was going a long time ago. Of course, Philip Agee's son is the editor there, along with Jeremy Kuzmarov. But they're doing a great work, and I think those are very good. Of course, Monthly Review, some of the other ones that people here are probably familiar with. Monthly Review is very good. And there's some great work being done by young journalists on podcast. Richard Medhurst is one. Caitlin Johnson is a very good writer. So those are a few names. If anybody wants to email me. I'd be more than happy to provide more information if there's a specific area. Those are the ones that I like. How about you, Pierre? What do you like?
Yes, the coverage of Haiti has been spotty, both from the right and the left, and sometimes very disappointing among the left because, of course, you expect the left to get it right, because after all, they are the left. But many times they just get it totally wrong, and they repeat the nonsense from the State Department, the disinformation campaign, and they are more dangerous with doing it because being left, people assume that they are correct, but they are parroting the line from the State Department. So what I would, the one that pops in my mind right away is you have Kevin Pina, who has Haiti Information Project. And Kevin has done tremendous, great work on the situation in Haiti. And he's got, that's a Twitter account, and it's called Haiti Information Project. So that one, Haiti Info Proj. So that definitely is one. Haiti Action Committee's website, HaitiSolidarity.net. We also have a Facebook page, Haiti Action Committee Facebook, which we do cover the situation, but not as on a daily basis as Kevin Pina would. We do more analysis. And then you can find some spotty, good articles once in a while that pop in, and then, but really followed by, and you have to be very careful. I call these poison pills because many times they look pretty good, but then there is a real little cliche. One of them has been the lie that President Aristide collaborated with the Clintons in bringing down the production of Haiti, which is totally false. But when you have a left publication that repeats this nonsense, excuse the term, but that repeats this State Department disinformation line, then that's what it seeps back out there again. So to wrap up, I would say HaitiSolidarity.net, Haiti Action Committee Facebook, and also definitely Kevin Pina, Haiti Info Proj, which is a publication of Haiti Information Project. Those are the ones that are very consistent that come to my mind.
Thank you, Pierre. Is it, and this again maybe is for both of you, is it possible to distinguish sanctions that do some good from harmful sanctions? Is that a sensible question? And do you have an answer for it?
Well, in the past, the sanctions on South Africa were good. There was a big campaign in the sporting arena because international athletics was so important in South Africa. The campaign to boycott the Springboks was hugely important, their international rugby team. And later on, late in the day, you had pressure on U.S. banks not to loan money to South Africa, and some sanctions, effectively sanctions, were passed there. That was good. You had the United Nations taking some measures to exclude South Africa because of their apartheid policies, and that the reason that so I think we're not against all sanctions. Sanctions can be legal or illegal. For them to be legal, they have to be authorized by the United Nations Security Council. And that's why the 10,000 U.S. sanctions are violating international law, because almost none of them are in compliance with or are in accord with the UN Security Council. I think if we think about the pressure on apartheid Israel, the boycott divestment sanctions campaign should be supported. And it's quite amazing how hysterical they get in Congress and in the media at the suggestion that that Israel should be sanctioned or reprimanded or there should be boycotts of them. They get absolutely hysterical about that. In fact, as everybody here knows, you've got various states in the United States which have made it illegal or have imposed penalties on any company that complies in any way with the BDS movement against apartheid Israel. So they're completely vehement against sanctions in that case, and sanctions that wouldn't even very much hurt Israel because of its economy and so forth. Whereas they're completely blind and happy to go along with crushing sanctions on against Venezuela, Iran, Syria, and they want to do that. They're threatening to do that against Nicaragua in the near future.
Yeah, thanks so much. Pierre, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, definitely. I think we must resist these international forces, these international players who are full of greed and avarice and want to destroy human life. They are all about, they try to create in our minds as if, oh, well, sanctions, then you cannot be, if you're for sanctions against South Africa, you have to be for sanctions that we impose on Cuba. The two do not mix. The two are two separate issues. One is about human rights, life, governments or people, communities that are about life affirming, that support human rights and dignity and the struggle for human rights and dignity. The other one is about maintaining the rule of a minority to super exploit a majority. And somebody was trying to tell me this, and I said, don't play that little semantic games on me, because in Haiti, we had to deal with this. After the first coup d'etat against President Aristide, people in Haiti were strongly in favor of sanctions being imposed against the Haitian military, who were killing people, and they were financed by the Haitian oligarchy, by this little elite that was paying the military so that they could kill people. They were killing people left and right in Haiti and maintaining the dictatorship. So the US, not the US unilaterally, but the Organization of American States and the UN declared sanctions against this particular clique of criminals, you see? But the way the US and many of the organization, many of the members of the OAS were doing it, they were actually making the sanctions to hurt the grassroots movement, to hurt the majority population in Haiti. And it was until the world community became aware of this and started putting pressure on the Clinton administration, within 4 months of the sanctions being applied where they were intended to be applied against this oligarchy that was raining death on the people of Haiti, within 4 months, the coup was over. You see, the coup was over. But it took about 2 years or more, if not 2.5 years, to get them to be put on the right people, those who were destroying human life and violating human rights in Haiti. So that's my comment about it. And we have to really push back against this attempt to confuse or conflate or mess with our minds on this issue of sanctions.
Thank you, Pierre. The next question is also for you. Oh, can you name some of the companies that have exploited Haiti's resources like gold, silver, etc.? Are you able to name some of those companies?
Vaguely, because they do change names and sometimes they work through other subsidiaries, but we've had, for example, I know Reynolds Aluminum used to be there for the bauxite in Haiti. We also had Disney Company, was at one time very present in its own name in Haiti, but since then, I believe they were through subsidiaries. These are the sweatshops, the infamous sweatshops, and that way they can hide behind a contractor or subcontractor or subcontractors, you know, so that nobody can address them, can put the finger at them. There are many of those companies that operate in Haiti. Some of them, they are involved in electronics. where the Haitians make the parts but get paid very low wages. I mentioned $5 per day, sometimes for a 10-hour day. And $5, we are talking, and the cost of living has been made so high that that doesn't mean anything in terms of people being able to live on that money. So I cannot name some others. There are a number of textile companies. I know that the Charles Conaghan and it was called oh boy, Labor Committee for Human Rights for Human Rights. It had gotten, the name was expanded to that, for human rights. The name might have changed. They had produced at one time a book on the companies, and they have the famous video, Mickey Mouse Goes to Haiti. Now the name may have changed, and it really details some of that issue. They call it the science of exploitation. And they really connected not only the pure exploitation of the people economically, but also the connection between that exploitation and the repression by the security forces and the Haitian government.
Well, thank you both. I could sit here all night and ask you questions, but I'm afraid we're running a little late on time. So thank you both for sharing so much of your experience.
One more, I'm sorry, one more is VCS mining. That's involving gold. And there is a number, and Hillary Clinton's brother, who's now deceased, was a big person in that whole world. So my apologies.
What was the name of the company again?
I believe it's VCS Mining. I would have to double check that, but people can look at that.
Yeah. Vivian, I know Candace asked a couple of good questions. I just, if we don't have time to answer it now, I just want to encourage her, if she emails me, I'll be happy to reply. Or I could take a minute or two now if there's time.
How about 1 minute?
Email, Rick.
What
is your email, Rick?
It's rsterling1@gmail.com.
Okay, great. Okay, 1 minute, and then we'll have to go.
Okay, well, quickly, Candace asked about the composition of the at the United Nations voting for and against that very strong resolution. There were 131 countries voting for it, 56 voting against it. The 56 was basically the US, Israel, NATO, Canada, Australia, and a bunch of small countries, Micronesia, Nauru, Marshall Islands, Liechtenstein, Papua New Guinea. That was it. India, China, all the big countries, or nearly all the big countries of the world that aren't under the thumb of the US voted for that resolution. And then the other question is regarding the United Nations. It's true that the United Nations Security Council is hobbled because of the veto of the permanent members, but I think it's very important to support the United Nations. It's the only thing we have, and the United Nations Charter is a wonderful document. If we could enforce that, that needs to be supported. In fact, at the UN General Assembly a few weeks ago at the opening, a coalition was formed in defense of the UN Charter. So this is a group of countries coming together to try to restore the United Nations to what it should be, and in my mind that is to be supported, not undermined.
Thanks so much.
So we need a change really in the UN. They got to clean house, because right now it's a tool of the imperialist powers against the nations like Haiti. So it needs to be cleaned up. I'm with you on that, Rick.
Yes.
Okay, our closing song, Gracias a la Vida, and the benediction will be sung by the Reverend Sylvia Brandon Perez. Sylvia is a rebel priest, a singer-songwriter, an interpreter for torture victims, and one of EPI's board members. Sylvia is Cuban-born, a multilingual translator, author, and an ordained Catholic priest who provides paralegal services for people who can't afford them. Sylvia also runs a Catholic worker house from her home in Hayward, California. It provides temporary shelter, showers, food, and even clothing for people down on their luck. It's called the Oscar Romero and Simone Wheel Catholic Worker House. Sylvia.
I wanted to say, can you hear me?
Yeah,
I just wanted to say, I am a tremendous supporter of the UN, and whenever I go yell at governmental officials in California, I always talk about you are in violation of the charter. But I was talking about FARC, and FARC stands for the Security Council, which originally was France, America, Russia, China, and I don't remember, and England. And it's a farce because one member can undo, and usually it's like you said, Rick, before about the fact that, every year for years and years now, everybody's voting to stop the sanctions against my homeland. And every year, two countries, United States and Sylvia, Israel. I am a Sephardic Jew that is completely against what is happening against Palestine. It's outrageous. And my second book, and by the way, my benediction is going to come from a book that I wrote called Sounds for the New Millennium. And I'm donating 15 copies, but my second book is about the connections between all these evildoers, in particular, Israel and the United States. In other words, for example, just to give you an example, in Guatemala, you remember the Tuskegee experiments in the United States. Well, in Guatemala, they sent syphilis. They told people that this wasn't syphilis, that it was a drug to help them. They were actually injecting people, the United States, the peasants, the Mayans, with syphilis, okay? And now the United States is saying that it's a little too late, that the statute of limitations on war crimes should not expire ever. So my second book, which I'm also donating, although it hasn't been published yet, and my third book is going to be interesting because it's called California, the Promise and the Betrayal. The fact that people are dying of hunger in the country, in the state with the 5th largest budget in the world is outrageous. Outrageous. And that they are violating, I'm sorry, I wasn't supposed to do this. Let me sing Gracias a la Vida, and we'll go from there. So anyway, Gracias a la Vida was written by Violeta Parra, and it's a beautiful song. And unfortunately, eventually she killed herself, but that has nothing to do with it. So I needed to tune the Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me dio 2 luceros que cuando los abro perfecto distingo lo negro del blanco y en el alto cielo su fondo estrellado y en las multitudes el hombre que yo amo. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado el sonido y el abecedario, con él las palabras que canto y declamo, madre, amigo, hermano y luz alumbrando la ruta del alma del que está amando. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado la risa y me ha dado el llanto, así yo distingo dicha de quebranto, los dos materiales que forman mi canto y el canto de ustedes, que es el mismo canto, y el canto de todos, que es mi propio canto. Gracias a la vida, gracias a la vida. And now for the benediction. We need to add dental care to plans for elderly people so that I can get my tooth fixed. Anyway, so I was at Standing Rock twice. It was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And of course, it would be wonderful if I could find and I wrote this. O Creator, who has given the gift of life, has given us the gift of life as social animals with the power of community and love and sharing. Allow us to walk and stand and share together. Allow us to remember what it was like to live and share in the commons. Allow us to remember and reclaim what makes us joyous animals that live with each other, love each other, help each other, learn from each other. Allow us to realize that injustice to one is a threat to justice everywhere. Allow us to be steadfast, to be Samids as the Palestinians who stand when their land is taken and their water polluted and their olive trees uprooted and destroyed. Perseverant and steadfast and courageous and brave, ready to smile and dance and laugh and plant more olive trees. Allow us to live each day of our lives as if it were the last, and to leave this planet and this earthly sojourn better than we found it. We will indeed overcome. We will indeed plant new seeds of justice and sharing and freedom. Allow us to work without waiting for result, as do the monarch butterflies who cross the skies and die along the way, but who do so for their grandchildren, or the emperor penguins who care for their young through the long cold night of winter, day after day, breath after breath. Allow us to do what we must and to grow in hope, which is the thing with feathers. Allow us to sing from the skies and from the loving ground in which we live. Mitakuye Oyasin, we are all related. Namaste, the divinity in me salutes the divinity in you. In Lakesh Alakim, you are another me, I am another you. Ubuntu, I am because you are. Gracias.
Thank you, Sylvia, for the beautiful blessing and the beautiful gracias a la vida. And gracias to everyone. Thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to go to the EPI website, epicalc.org, and push the donate button. Thank you so much.